Welcome back, students. Within this video, we're going to talk about the muscular system. So we're going to talk about muscle tissue, the three different types we're going to look at here in a second. I've got to introduce Manee in the background. So Manee, you have muscles too, so you can participate a little bit in this video. But we're going to be talking about the different types of muscles that the human body has. Even though manatees have a good amount of muscles, definitely still don't have as many muscles as we do. So a little bit of facts before we get to the muscles. So thinking about, again, some medical terminology to help us. There's about 650, give or take a few, muscles throughout the human body. The good thing is we're only going to go through 14 or 15 of those that are going to be the major muscles that you're going to need to know. But as you can see, there'll be a lot of muscles over the next few videos that I will be talking about. Now, as far as names of muscles, if you see the word M-Y-O, that's going to mean myo means muscle. Okay, that will definitely help you as we're looking at some names here in a few minutes. And the word sarco, S-A-R-C-O, also will mean muscle. So again, if you know some of that medical terminology is very important. Okay, again, the more that you can figure out some of these prefixes, suffixes, that will help you when you add those to the root words to figure out what something is meaning. Now remember, muscles themselves need a lot of ATP. Okay, so go back and watch the video concerning how our body processes ATP. The videos would be such as the cell chapter would be one, and also the chapter video that relates to the things that we eat. Okay, so definitely be thinking of glucose, and of course glucose is going to give us ATP. Now there are three different types of muscle tissue within the body. So some of this is kind of repeat stuff that you would have seen hopefully in a prior video. Under that video you would have seen that the three different types of muscle tissue that we have are going to be smooth, cardiac, and skeletal. Okay, now within this video, I want to spend most of the video talking about the skeletal system. You'll have a skeleton to help you. Okay, I'll be putting the muscles on the skeleton in the later part of this video. So skeletal muscles, of course, attached to our bones. Skeletal muscle tissue is going to be an organ. Okay, so remember, we're in a group of cells, we put those together to make tissues, and that eventually, of course, is going to make the organ. So the skeletal organ, skeletal system that you would have seen in the last video, those muscles that are going to attach are going to move those bones. So that is definitely important to be thinking about. Now, they're voluntary. We can control them. Okay, that's definitely the first thing that you definitely need to be understanding about the differences between the three types. That skeletal muscles are the only type that we can definitely control. Now, another thing about them is they have these things called striations. Okay, they're very heavily striated, and these striations, these stripes, are going to help because we definitely need a lot of energy getting to our skeletal muscles to help us move. That's important to be thinking about. So voluntary and striations. Okay, something we're going to find as far as names associated with our skeletal muscles. Now, the second type of muscle tissue is going to be cardiac. Okay, now cardiac is very similar to our skeletal muscles in that it is also striated, has little stripes, because think about how much energy, how much ATP we're going to need for our heart. But they differ because they are not involuntary is the word you're going to see. Okay, so meaning we cannot obviously control when our heart beats or it doesn't beat. Okay, so cardiac itself, of course, we find in the walls of our heart. Where's the location? So cardiac is involuntary, we cannot control it, and it is also striated. Now the last type of muscle tissue, number 3, is going to be smooth. Okay, so smooth is the one that is none, okay? Meaning that you cannot control it, it's involuntary, and it is also not striated or non-striated, does not have those stripes. We don't need a lot of energy on a constant basis getting to the smooth muscles. So places you'll find smooth muscles will be a lot of videos concerning these in the future. Walls of our hollow organs, our vessels, respiratory in different passageways throughout our body. So basically kind of view it this way. If it's a muscle tissue, if it is not skeletal and not cardiac, that's what those are. Okay, considered first classification is smooth muscle tissue. Now, you definitely want to be thinking about skeletal muscle tissue of the different types of functions that we're going to find. A couple of them make sense, okay? Movement for sure. We think about the muscles are going to pull those bones, okay? We're going to end up with the levers that we talked about, the lever system last video. That's where these are going to come into play. And number two, as far as the three things, is your posture, okay? So it maintains our posture, also muscle tone. Okay, because we're fighting against gravity on a regular basis, those muscles are going to help with that. And the third of the three things for functions is going to be heat production. Okay, did talk a lot about it in videos before this, but it's definitely important to be thinking about our brain. Okay, that we'll be looking at pretty soon in the next video of these different areas of our brain that control heat production. But I will mention the brain definitely within this video because the brain is directly going to control whether our body moves or our body doesn't move. Okay, we have to always be thinking about anything in our body is directly controlled by the brain and its tail called the spinal cord. Okay, so definitely be thinking about that. But heat production is when the brain tells our muscles to move, contract, and relax. Are going to be the two words you're going to hear with skeletal muscle tissues. Contracting and relaxing is when the brain tells it to move. It might be causing it to move because we're cold. Okay, you ever shivered before on a really cold day? Well, that is coming from, it is going to increase, and we're going to have a heat gain because of that. So contracting of the cells produces most of the heat required to actually maintain our body heat. Hence, when you're sitting for a long time, your temperature, as far as the core, starts dropping, and like when you get up and you start to walk around. Okay, think about the last time maybe you went outside when it was really hot and you didn't really want to do as much. Okay, or if it's really cold and you want to move around and you naturally kind of homeostasis start to move around to kind of warm up your temperature. So movement, posture, and heat production are the three main functions of our skeletal muscle tissue. Now, I want to mention here as far as the structure, okay, when we're thinking about skeletal muscle, there are two things you definitely need to be thinking about back to the tissues, okay? Skeletal muscle tissue also has connective tissue membranes, okay? Now, when we're thinking about a bone itself connecting, joining, ligaments are going to be surrounding those connections, okay, keeping the bone more secure, more stable. Now, muscles, when they connect to that bone, they cross over those joints, that is going to be called a tendon. And I really want you to be thinking of that word tendon of it's tender. Okay, so when you're feeling around, palpating on your body, okay, when you find tender areas, that is more likely going to be an area where the tendon, and tendons are where muscles attach. And FYI, muscles always attach over a joint. Okay, so in instance, in my elbow joint, there's a muscle that attaches on my forearm, and then the other side of that attaches on my humerus. So always be thinking, when you're thinking about movements throughout your whole body, that there is going to be tendons on each side of that joint that are usually tender where those muscles directly attach. And remember, the middle of that muscle, okay, so you think about the middle of my bicep, that's called the belly. Okay, so tendons are at the ends, belly is in the middle, okay, when you're thinking about muscles. Now, next you're going to watch, and I use some straws to kind of help us to demonstrate within this little next part of the video to show you three names you need to be familiar with and the three codings that go over those names. So fiber, fascicle, and the muscle itself. Okay, so fibers are the cells, individual. Fascicle is when you bundle those cells together, and then you take all of those fascicle bundles, that's what's going to make up the muscle. Now, endo is the one that coats the individual fibers. Peri is going to cover the fascicles, and covering the muscle is the epi. Okay, so myosin will be the name that, of course, you will see. So definitely watch this next little part of the video to hopefully help you to visualize what a muscle cell and a muscle as a whole looks like. Now within this little diagram, I'm going to help you to hopefully visualize what muscle cells and the muscle as a whole looks like. So I have a straw here for you, and if you buy, when you get a straw, a lot of times, especially individual wise, you're going to have a coating that goes over that straw. So cells, as far as muscles, are called fibers. So a fiber is an individual cell within the muscle tissue system. Okay, very, very important. So when you think about muscle tissue, remember we're talking about individual cells. Now each one of those cells has a coating. Okay, now that coating is called the endomyosin. So endomyosin covers, just like this wrapper covers the straw, each individual fiber. So they're long. So just like the cells we've talked about in previous chapters, they're going to have a lot of the same things. Okay, they'll have nucleuses. Okay, it's elongated instead of a circle like we did in prior videos. Now, if you take a couple of these, I'll kind of change them up. They still have the plastic on them. If you take a couple, obviously it should be more than a couple, but I'll just take a couple just to demonstrate of these fibers, these cells, individual cells, and we bundle them together. Okay, and I'll use just a little wrap coating. Now you could use tape or something like that, but I kind of like to use my little wrapping. So if we take them and we wrap and bundle them together, that is called a fascicle. Okay, so a bundle is a whole bunch of individual fiber cells that are bundled and wrapped and coated. Okay, those fascicles then are coated by the perimyosin. Okay, so definitely know those coatings, those membranes that protect it. And then lastly, okay, if you take a whole bunch of those fascicles, okay, and you put them all together, I'll even include this one, and you were to wrap them up, put them all together, and if you were to wrap them up and encase them in your membrane, that is called the epimyosin. That is what a muscle is. So a muscle is a whole bunch of fibers, individual little fibers that are coated, okay, whole bunch of fascicles that are coated, and that is what is going to make up your muscle. Now one thing extra is that we got one more thing on your table. Okay, now I know it's pink, probably should have picked yellow, okay, but the pink is related to the nerves. Definitely know that every single muscle is innervated, means that it is getting energy from the nervous system. And you could connect that nerve right there. Of course, we'll talk about nerves in the next video, but this nerve directly to the spinal cord, because off of the spinal cord becomes the spinal nerves. Okay, and that is what's going to directly control the skeletal muscles within our body. So the next video that I want to get into is going to be talking about how this nerve connects to the spinal cord, and those spinal nerves, all 31 of them, and how they directly control all of those individual muscle fibers. There's a couple names of the cell organelles that I definitely want you to be familiar with. And I want to try to simplify it a little bit so as you're reading in your textbook, that way when you're seeing these different words, you already know the parts. You just need to make sure you know that you're going to see the word sarco. Okay, and that's why I said at the beginning of this video that sarco equals muscle. So a sarcoplasma is referring to the cytoplasm. Okay, so if you remember what the cytoplasm is a gel in the cell. Okay, remember the organelles, they're going to live within that cytoplasm. Now, a sarcolemma is going to be the plasma membrane. Okay, so that's important. Think of the cell membrane, the outside of that cell, okay, itself. Now, a sarcoplastic rectium, you've heard that word before, is ER. This is going to be the ER within the cell of a muscle, okay, that's going to store calcium. Okay, that's very important. Okay, the sarcoplastic rectium stores calcium. You definitely want to know that. And then T-tubules. Now, T-tubules are extensions of your plasma membrane. Okay. Now, the only difference, remember those little projections that came off of the cell membrane? These actually go inside. They penetrate inside of the cell muscle fiber in order to release calcium. Okay, we're going to see that here in a second when we talk about how the muscle fiber contracts. Now, 3 other words that would be important for you to know is the myofibrils. Okay, these are protein bundles. This is what literally makes up the individual pieces of your muscle cell. Okay, they're called fibers. The next word is called satellite cells, and in satellite cells, all these are stem cells. Okay, they're going to help to, grow, reproduce, mitosis. And then lastly, a group of myofibrils, okay, those protein bundles, when they contract, that unit is going to be called a sarcomere. Okay, so again, some names. I have a total of, I think, 7 names to kind of help you as you're reading through the textbook to make sure that you know definitely the definition of those words. Now, this next part I want to do in 6 different steps to help you. Okay, so as you're reading through and trying to understand the complexity of how does a muscle contract and relax, I want to break it up into 6 different things so you're more comfortable with the basic. Okay, now I'm not going to get into depth in this video. There are some other great videos. I know if you're watching this, usually to the side, you're going to see a whole list of different videos. So you could put in this thing called sliding filament mechanism to help you to learn in more detail of how that a muscle contracts. But the 6 things are, okay, to help you to know the basics, because you need to know the basics of how a muscle works. Number 1, the brain. Okay, now the brain, as you kind of saw with the straws, and I brought in a nerve, nerves directly connect to a muscle. Okay, so the first thing that has to happen is the brain and the spinal cord, that's the tail off of the brain, through a spinal nerve that's connected directly to a muscle, has to release electricity. Okay, now I'm not going to get into depth in this video. Next video that you're going to see, you always can look ahead in the textbook to kind of give you a little bit more idea. But the brain sends an electrical impulse. It has to do with chemicals directly to that nerve. That nerve will tell that muscle that it needs to contract and relax. Okay. Now, how the brain works is through chemicals called neurotransmitters. So there's a junction that meets the brain, the nerve, to the muscle, and that's called the neuromuscular junction. Okay, that's that connection. Okay, so if you wrap my finger up here, and this being the muscle, that direct connection between the nervous system and the muscular system is the neuromuscular junction. Now, at that junction, there's a release of chemicals called neurotransmitter. Now, the main one is ACH, and ACH is going to bind to receptors. So kind of go back and think about cells. Remember that outside, okay, of the cell, that plasma membrane, that like the gate, okay, the channel, there are little receptors there that will hopefully receive information from that nerve through the use of neurotransmitters. It will bind, literally attach to that receptor and wait for the muscle cell, the fiber, to process and receive that information. Now, when it does that, hopefully that information then is now sent through those T-tubules. Remember those things that penetrate and embed inside of, so we kind of think with the fingers and the plasma membranes going out, these go in, those T-tubules, and that is going to cause a release of something. Okay, the release of that something is calcium. So remember when I said, so number 1, the electrical current has to come, okay, through the neuron, it releases ACH. Okay, number 2, that ACH then has to bind, okay, has to bind to that receptor on the outside of the cell plasma membrane. Now, one thing to remember, that plasma cell membrane that is on the outside of the cell always has an electrical charge. Okay, now in order for it to have an action happen, they call that an action potential. Like, it has the possibility to work only when the pieces align up, okay, themselves. So there is a potential that definitely can happen. Now, it's at that neuromuscular junction that's where the fibers contract that muscle cell through those neurotransmitters. Number 3, it has to go through the T-tubule system itself. And then that brings us to number 4 of there has to be a release then of calcium that's stored within the SR, the sarcoplastic rectum. That's storing that calcium. Once that calcium is released, then number 5 happens. That calcium then is going to bind to 2 different proteins, okay? Actin and myosin. Now we're going to talk about a thing called ATP, which you should already kind of know the basics, and we're also going to talk about 2 other proteins. But actin and myosin are going to work with ATP, and they cause the action called sliding filament mechanism to happen. That's going to allow that muscle to contract. So we literally have to get to the 5th step before the muscle is even going to contract. Now once that contraction happens, that brings us to the last step, number 6. Because you do not want a muscle to stay in contraction. You want it to do its job and then go back to relaxing. Because remember, a muscle has 2 jobs. Contract, relax. Okay, contracting does the action. Relaxing brings it back to the neutral position. Okay, back to point 1. Okay, as you could say, like the set point in some way. So in step number 6, muscle relaxation will only occur if that calcium leaves and is pumped back into the SR, away from those 2 proteins of actin and myosin, that they cannot interact with each other. So next I want to talk about, so you know the 6 steps hopefully, what actin and myosin do. Okay, so that way you can understand that why calcium joining the picture is so important. Now you're going to see next a little diagram to help you that will demonstrate what it looks like internally inside of a muscle fiber. Now always remember that the muscle fibers, the muscle cells, are connected directly to a nerve, and it's going to be the nerve that is directly going to control what the muscle does and not does. Now one thing to remember, and I kind of brought this to help us, and you'll see this within the part of the video, is when a muscle is contracting, okay, so the muscle starts off here and it attaches to 2 different areas. Okay, so if I'd attached it here in my forearm into my arm. Now once that muscle contracts, there's going to be a shortening that's going to occur, and that shortening that's going to occur is going to allow and pull this part closer to that part. Okay, and of course the opposite would happen when that muscle relaxes. So definitely think about, of course, like areas in the front of your body kind of makes sense. If I am, it's already lengthened, it shortens, it's going to pull that area closer. And then of course muscles on the back would do the exact same thing once that muscle on the front of your body is going to relax. Now a couple proteins you definitely want to be familiar with, okay, and I definitely will mention them here in a moment in that little part of this video, is actin and myosin. Okay, now remember, actin and myosin are going to be the 2 different proteins that what they call slide. Okay, so the model of muscle contracting is called the sliding filament mechanism, or sometimes it's called the hypothesis. And literally it kind of looks like this. What happens is that myosin and actin literally, and I'll kind of turn it this way so you can see it, literally slide past each other. Okay, that's shortening, and then once that relaxing happens, they go back to their set point. Okay, so they literally slide past. It's also called cross bridges, is another name that you actually will see when they overlap each other. Alright, so I'm hopefully going to be able to get a visual in your mind long term for you to be able to understand what the sliding filament mechanism looks like within a sarcomere. Now, got a couple different things here to point out. So the first one you'll see back here is calcium. Okay, calcium is going to be very, very important. We have to have calcium in this picture. The next thing I want to point out is this here would be the individual, the muscle fiber. Okay, also the units themselves individually would be called the sarcomeres. Then we have a nerve, okay, because we have to have the nervous system to tell the body what to do. And then these other would be what's inside of the sarcomere, okay, inside the muscle fiber itself. The blue, and you notice one's got a pink straw on it. I'll go ahead and take the pink straw off so you can kind of just see, and I'll explain what the pink straw means here in a minute, that there are 2 blues and a red that's got some little heads on it. So I'll kind of flip it up so you can kind of see it a little bit better. So the blues are going to relate to one of the two proteins that you definitely need to understand in this sliding filament mechanism. So the blues are the actin. Okay, actin's a protein, and the red with the little heads on it is going to be myosin. Okay, so actin and myosin. Now, the pink straw that I'm going to put over the actin is another type of protein that's going to one of the other proteins that helps to block to make sure a muscle does not contract unless it's supposed to. Now, there are two different names you're going to see of those proteins. There's tropotin and tropomyosin. That are two other proteins that helps to make sure that the muscle is not contracting when it does not need to be contracting. But if you notice that because of that, it's preventing the myosin from touching the actin, and that's a problem. So how that this works to begin with, definitely understand that the nervous system, okay, a spinal nerve directly attaches to that muscle fiber, okay. It's going to send an impulse, electricity to the end of the neuromuscular junction. At that junction, there's going to be receptors that will receive information from acetylcholine. Okay, so ACH as it's called for short. That neurotransmitter that I'll talk about in next video when we learn about the nervous system, that's the chemical messenger that tells those receptors to do something. So once that happens, that coding, okay, remember that coding is going to be, remember that plasma membrane. Within that plasma membrane, remember we have those T tubules that embed inside, deep inside of this muscle fiber. Now within that, what needs to happen is once that ACH stimulates, it's going to tell the SR, the sarcoplastic rectium, that is holding the calcium to release its calcium. Okay, now once calcium, I'm not going to pour the water per se on the table, but once the calcium is released, that then pays off, okay, by the use of using ATP to take that one protein away. Now that that protein has been taken out of the picture, myosin then can touch and grab on, the heads of myosin can grab onto the actin. And when that happens, we go from looking like this end here to looking like this. There's a shrinking that occurs by the grabbing of that myosin head to the actin. Now, as soon as that happens and that calcium leaves the picture, that coating, that protector is going to go right back on, and as it's going on, it's causing those heads of the myosin to come off, and then guess what happens? And we get a lengthening that occurs. So contracting and relaxing relates to whether calcium has joined the picture. So next video, we'll get into talking about how the nerve and the ACH works, okay, how the neurotransmitters tell, because remember, neurotransmitters, I will tell you now, affect more than just skeletal muscles, okay? They're going to affect everywhere within our body, okay? But definitely kind of understand at least the basics now this week within this video of the nervous system has to tell this to occur. Okay, so the key players are calcium. You need to know calcium has to join the picture. ATP is already within the cell. Remember the mitochondria? Okay, mitochondria living within that cell. Okay, we call it a fiber, but it's still a cell. And then we want a shrinking to happen to cause that muscle to contract. Okay, and remember when a muscle contracts, that contraction is then going to cause the action to happen. So you've got a blocker. Okay, in order to get rid of that blocker, that protein, calcium has to be joining that picture. Once calcium's in the mix, that's going to come off of there. Once that comes off of there, then the myosin can go up, join the heads, okay, almost like a rowing type of motion. Then that's going to cause a shrinking to occur. Once that's shrinking, that's contracting. The muscle's going to do its job, and it's going to move those bones. That's the key ideal. It should be doing that, okay? And then, remember, these guys are inside, okay? They're inside, not on the outside. Then, once the calcium then is sucked back in to the SR, then we have that protein that's going to block. Now the myosin has to come off, and once the myosin comes off, then we get that lengthening back, that relaxing of the muscle itself. So hopefully kind of visualizing that. Again, make a model yourself. It will definitely help you to see it, but that is how the sliding filament mechanism definitely works within the cell. And again, 5 things that will really help you to understand the role of calcium and then, of course, ATP. Is anytime we have an action potential, remember the action potential is going to be coming from a nerve, we're going to have a muscle cell, okay, that's going to contract, okay, so remember it is lengthened. Okay. Now, when that happens, there's going to be calcium that's going to release from the SR, so the sarcoplastic rectum. Once that calcium is there, remember it's going to bind to that protein that's blocking the actin. Okay. Once that is removed, then you're going to have a shortening that's going to occur. And just as quickly as that happened, then that binding, that protein, tropin, is going to go back on the actin, and then the lengthening is going to go back when that's going to be relaxing of a muscle. So definitely know those couple steps that I just told you. Definitely understanding about the tendons attaching muscle to bone. That's going to allow those bones to move when that contraction happens, and then again move when that muscle, then those tendons relax. So we've got our little helper here that's going to be the skeleton that I'm going to place the muscles on. So this could be something that you could do on your own. Obviously, depending what time of year it is, definitely go to a party supply place at any time of the year and can get you a skeleton. But I want to place muscles on him and the names of the muscles to help you. Now, I'm not going to do every muscle in the book, okay? I'm going to keep them precise. There's going to be about 14 or 15 muscles that I'm going to be labeling on the skeleton to help you to be able to know the major ones, okay? In most healthcare, I'm not by any means, this is not a kinesiology class, this is not a PT class, so I won't be covering all the muscles, but make sure that you definitely still, though, look at all those muscles in the book to be familiar with the names. Now, 2 things that are important, again, is knowing the origin and insertion. And remember, origin and insertion means the 2 places that the muscle attaches and it crosses over a joint. Okay, that is very, very important. So kind of think back to last week's video when we talked about joints. Joints are when 2 or more bones meet together. Okay, that articulation that occurs at that particular spot. So the first muscles we're going to look at that I want to cover, there's actually just going to be a total of 2 different groups that I want to look at. Ones that move your mandible, and the other ones that will help to flex the head, okay, and help actually to give some stability to the head, but also help your head to turn. So the first one we're going to look at is the temporalis and the masseter together. As far as directions, and I'll kind of turn his head here so you can see, is remember, temporal bone, where the ear would be, that is going to be where you're going to find the first attachment. Okay, the second attachment is going to be at the mandible. Now, I'm not exactly precise on these, but I kind of wanted to put them there so you could definitely see what they are. So again, temporalis and masseter, those are the muscles that are going to help, as the book states, close the jaw. Okay, they're going to move the freely moving synovial joint at that area. Now the next one we're going to look at is called the sternocleidoid mastoid, okay, or better known as SCM. So the SCM is going to attach in the sternum and clavicle, okay, so we're going to be right in this region. So again, sternum here, clavicle here, okay, so sternum here, clavicle here, and then on the other side it's going to attach to the temporal bone. Right behind your ear there's an area called the mastoid process. So again, this is going to be deeper, okay, I have it on the outside. It is superficial, like you can feel it, but definitely want you to see the general areas of where it's going to attach. So 2 different names, okay, actually more than 2, but 2 different groups that you definitely need to know for the face. Again, there's other ones, and a lot of them again are named according to a lot of times the regions or the shapes or sizes of them. So temporalis, masseter, attaches to mandible, temporal bone, and then at the mastoid process that comes off of your temporal bone and your sternum and clavicle are your SCM. Okay, that's going to help to turn the head. Okay, so this one turns the head, this one's going to close the jaw. The next muscle we're going to be working in is muscles that are used for the upper extremities. Now, I've turned him around for a reason, because we're going to be looking at the posterior side of a big muscle called the trapezius. Okay, so the trapezius is going to be a muscle that attaches at your occiput or occipital bone, also attaches on the cervical and thoracic vertebrae, then it inserts on the front to the clavicle and scapula, okay, the acromion spine to be precisely. And then it attaches all the way down, and then attaches to that acromion process. Remember that little tiny process that went off of your scapula. So definitely know the attachment points to the trapezius is important. Its actions are very important because it raises the shoulder and pulls it back. Okay, so pulling your shoulder back. Then it's also going to have the superior portion extends and turns the head. So it's going to do a little bit of rotation too, as far as its action. Now the next one we're going to work at, same region, is called the latissimus dorsi. It's going to attach to the inferior vertebrae and the iliac crest and the humerus, okay, itself. So, as far as directions to kind of put it, you're going to put it here and then all the way down. I'm just going to kind of do it a little bit so you can kind of see it heading down toward the pelvis. Okay, it's a big swimmer's muscle. It's going to help a swimmer to do like the backstroke would be a good example of that. Now, the next muscle in this region is going to be the deltoid. And the deltoid attaches to the scapula and sternum at the acromion process, okay, so up here. And it also attaches to the humerus. So again, deltoid would be the next muscle. And it's going to attach within this region, okay, itself. So again, that acromion process that's up here. Now the deltoid has three sides, an anterior, lateral, and a posterior. Okay, its action, it's called the shoulder pad. Okay, it's called the shoulder pad for a reason, because it abducts the arm, so it's going to take the arm away. Okay, so if you were to take his arm and go that direction, it's going to take it away. And then it also is going to help with flexion, rotation, extension. So it helps to move your arm. Okay, it's like one of the prime movers. It initiates arm movement. Now the last muscle in this region I want to talk about in this video is going to be the rotator cuff muscles. Okay, now there are a total of 4 of them. Okay, so 4 of these rotator cuff muscles. And they're the ones that if you attach it in the back, they're going to be deeper to your trapezius. Got to turn Mr. Skeleton around here so we can see it a little bit better. Okay, so it's going to be the ones that are going to go, and I'm going to put it kind of on this side so you can kind of see it. It's going to go where that scapula, okay, is going to be located at. So the rotator cuff muscles would be right here. They attach, of course, we think of the acromion process. As far as attachments, now the rotator cuffs are very important because they are the muscles that help to move that arm after the deltoid initiates movement. Okay, so those are the rotator cuff muscles. Those are the muscles of the upper extremities. Now, 2 muscles that I want to focus on, muscles of the trunk. Now, the one that is the major chief muscle that helps you breathe, breathing in, is going to be the diaphragm. Okay, so the diaphragm. Now, the diaphragm itself is attached at the xiphoid process, cartilage of the inferior ribs, and also the lumbar vertebrae. And it inserts on a central tendon. So I'm going to kind of put it back up in here, okay, just to kind of put it in there for you. Now, you do have muscles that run between, okay, which would be your intercostals, internal, external. They help with breathing, but the diaphragm is the one that is your main breathing muscle, okay. It initiates, and once it's initiated, then you take that big deep breath in, okay. And then when it relaxes, you're going to breathe out. So the diaphragm. Now, the last muscle in this region I want to talk about is going to be the rectus abdominis. Okay, so your rectus abdominis is AKA the 6-pack. Okay, now this muscle is going to attach at the pubis. Okay, so way, way, way down here, okay, on your pelvis. And then the other area it attaches is the xiphoid process of the sternum and the ribs. Kind of attach it back here because it is an anterior type of muscle. Okay, of course it goes all the way down. I'll just kind of have it there for you. It's your 6-pack muscle. It's going to help when we do forced exhaling. So when you take a big deep breath in, because the diaphragm contracted and then it relaxes, You breathe out, and then when you force more air out, it is this muscle, okay, that is going to do that. So its job is to flex the spinal cord, okay, or column, and compresses the abdominal region itself. So those are the muscles of the trunk. Now the last muscles that I want to talk about are going to be the muscles of the lower extremities. Okay, muscles of the lower extremities. Now the first one is a group of 3 called your glutes. Okay, now you have 3 glute muscles. The 3 are the gluteus maximus, which is the largest. Okay, when you think about when you're sitting down that big on each side of your pelvis, that's the gluteus maximus. You have a medius, that's where we give injections at. Okay, when you get an injection in the pelvic region. And there is also a gluteus minimus. Okay, so I'll put them all here. Again, you're going to put them right in that pelvic coxal region, COXAL region, and that's where they're going to be located at. Now, as far as a job as a whole, they help to laterally, okay, think of going laterally, they help to laterally rotate that hip region itself. So know your glutes, all 3 of them. Now, I want to stick first to interior first, and then we'll look at posterior when it comes to our thigh and it comes to our leg muscles. Okay, so we'll start with the thigh. So on the anterior side, you have a group of 4 muscles. Okay, so a group of 4 muscles. Those muscles as a whole are going to be called the quadriceps femoris. Okay, so you think of the word quad, that's going to stand for 4. So in this case, again, it's on your thigh. Now, I want to kind of put it on here too. The name of the 4 muscles are the rectus femoris and 3 vastuses. Okay, so you have a vastus laterus, you have a vastus medius, and you have a vastus intermedius. Okay, would be so 3 vastuses and 1 rectus femoris. Okay, that's where they're going to be. Now, as far as attachments of our quads, they attach, of course, on the femur on one side, and on the other side, they attach to the patella, the kneecap, and the proximal portion of the tibia. So again, it attaches at the femur, the tibia, and the patella. It helps to control the movement of your thigh. Now below that, you're going to find on the leg the tibialis anterior. Okay, so if you think about, where the tibia is at, okay, so tibialis anterior, going to be here. Now this one, again, anteriorly based, is going to attach on the tibia and the ankle and your first metatarsal. Okay, so the ankle and the first metatarsal as far as attachments. It's going to dorsiflex. So remember, dorsiflex the foot, of course I'm showing you my hand. The foot, remember to raise the foot up. Okay, so it's going to cause this type of action. Okay, dorsiflexion is what that muscle is going to do. There's a muscle called the sartorius. Now the sartorius, the reason why I'm picking on it, because it is the longest muscle in the body. Now attachment points for this, it starts at the iliac spine. Okay, so think about the top of your iliac, the top of your hip bone, your pelvis, all the way down to the tibia. And this is the one that helps you cross your legs. Okay, so again, you're thinking about it going all the way from the top here, and it's going to go all the way down to here. Okay, so starts off lateral and goes medial. Okay, so it starts off lateral and goes medial as far as its attachment, the longest muscle in the body. Now, let's look at the muscles on the back side, the posterior side. Now, the next muscle is going to be on your thigh. Okay, the next muscle, a group of 3 muscles, is going to be called the 3 hamstrings. Okay, so remember your quads are on the front. Your I think of sitting on my hand. The hamstring muscles are in the back posteriorly. Now the names of them are bicep femoris of the 3 muscles and 2 semis. Okay, so the semis are semi-membranous and semi-tendinosus. Okay, so biceps femoris and 2 semis. Those are going to be the muscles that are going to go on your thigh. Okay, posterior thigh. So we'll place those right there. And then, of course, with those attachment points are the ischium. So remember, you sit on your ischium, tuberosity. Okay, and they also go to your fibula and your tibula, depending upon which of the 3 that we're talking about. So definitely know where your hamstrings are located. And as far as action of our hamstrings are going to flex the knee and extend the leg. So flexion of the knee, again, would be kicking yourself in the butt, okay? Extending at the hip region would be going outwards at the hip, okay? So definitely make sure you know the actions of those. It's opposite to the quads. So the quads were the ones that as a group were going to extend the knee. Okay, so remember, extending is lengthening, increasing that distance. So don't get those two confused at the knee, and then at the hip, it's going to flex the hip. So hamstrings and quads, remember, just pick one, and the other one's going to be the opposite, okay, of what it does. And then last but not least is going to be the gastrocnemius and our soleus, okay? And again, soleus and gastrocnemia are on your leg. Okay, so they'd go down here. Those are the ones when the foot goes down. Okay, so we think of the foot going down, planting down. That's what causes plantar flexion. As far as attachments of those, they attach both on the Achilles tendon, the calcaneus. Okay, so way down here when you think about the calcaneus, the heel. And then on the other side, one attaches to the femur, which would be your gastrocnemius, and the fibula and part of the tibia would be the soleus, because the soleus is going to be on the side. Okay, the gastrocnemius is in the middle itself. So hopefully Mr. Skeleton Guy helped you. You can definitely see, get you some felt, get you a skeleton, write the names on, because the more you do, the easier it's going to get to name these muscles. There's a lot of muscles that I did not talk about. Go ahead and name those muscles. Maybe label every muscle on the body so that way you know what they are and what they do. Now the last part of this video that I'm going to talk about is muscle disorders. Now there are various muscle disorders that you're going to see, and they will definitely fall under a disorder such as a spasm, an injury, and then also the different type of diseases that directly affect the muscles. Now remember, when we're talking about muscles, we also are talking about, of course, tendons, okay? So there also will be some disorders you will see, what they call the associated structures. Spasm is a sudden involuntary muscle contraction that's usually always going to be painful. A spasm of the viscera, of visceral muscles, is colic, okay? So you think of the intestines themselves. Where a seizure is just where we have a whole bunch of spasms in a row. Now a cramp is a strong, powerful muscle contraction. Usually we think of cramps, of course, in the legs and the foot, okay, such as a Charlie horse itself. Now muscle atrophy relates to a decrease in size, because if we don't use it, we lose it, okay? And that usually means that we're not getting enough blood flow to that particular area. Now, as far as muscle injuries, you're going to be looking at this one with a T for strain. Okay, sprain with a P relates to the ligament, so bone to bone. T is going to relate to the tear. Okay, it occurs either we overuse a muscle or overstretch it, that causes a tear within the muscle itself. Now you can get, of course, soreness, okay, they call it delayed onset muscle soreness, and that's stiffness that can occur after a very intense workout, okay. Usually it comes from that we've got a lot of inflammation in that area because of those little micro tears that happen to the muscle tissue itself. And again, we get some lactic acid sometimes that builds up. Now, muscle diseases that you're going to see are diseases such as muscular dystrophy. Again, those are just kind of the umbrella term of a group of disorders of where we have a deterioration of the muscle tissue, but we still have the muscle intact. Okay, so that way you would have, unfortunately, the pain that comes with it, but the muscle is not wanting to do what it needs to do. Myasthenia gravis is characterized by a very chronic, so usually you have that condition as a chronic muscle fatigued with just a little bit of movement, and then the person feels like they ran a marathon, okay, with that type of disease. We've got fibromyalgia, okay, and again, fibromyalgia is, of course, relating to muscle pain. Anytime you see itis, remember this inflammation. It could be an inflammation of the muscle tissue itself or the connective tissue that coats, okay, remember that fascia that we talked about that coats the muscles. It could be either one of those. Now, the last part relates to the disorders of those accessory structures. So the disorder of the accessory structures. So tendinitis, again, itis, is inflammation of the muscle tendons. You think of if you get like plantar fasciitis, Okay, that's where the tendon that connects that, again, our plantar surface, the bottom of our foot, okay, the Achilles tendon, okay, gets inflamed. Things such as like tennis elbow, okay, anything that relates to itises at those joints, and of course the muscles that attach to those joints, okay, are also usually affected too. So usually if you see a bone disorder, muscle sometimes will also fall into that. Anything that's touching an area that's inflamed has the potential for it to stay inflamed or even spread to other areas. Shin splits is also under those accessory structures, so you definitely, that's that tibia, which is your shin bone, okay, that you should be aware of from that last video. So then, hopefully within this video, I've helped you understand at least the basics of that sliding filament mechanism. Okay, again, that lengthening, okay, that shortening that happens of contracting and relaxing. Okay, and hopefully using this like I showed you within the video of the actin and myosin, how they touch each other and then they cross, and the cross bridges will be formed. When you're learning through the muscles, make sure, again, origin versus insertion. Okay, now kind of think back with that one area moves on the, as far as it moving, the other area stays put. Okay, now obviously that can change. Okay, example of, we think about our forearm muscles, normally we know we're moving this way, they go back this way, but if I'm standing still holding on to something, then my arm is going to come closer to my forearm. Okay, but remember, you always have 2 attachment points, at least minimum, sometimes more. Okay, we think of bicep, 2 heads, 2 attachments up here and 1 down here. Okay, and then triceps would have 3 and then 1. Okay, so then you get into 4. So at least 2 attachment points, origin, insertion, those areas. One is going to stay put as far as the attachment, the other one's going to try to move closer or further away from that attachment point. But definitely important, go through that huge list of muscles. Okay, start getting familiar with the muscles. Again, I only picked on 14, 15 of them due to the fact of that there are a lot more muscles that are out there, and within this particular class, we keep it kind of simple to the major muscles that would be affected in the fields that we're in. So, Manee, we didn't really focus on you much, unfortunately, within this video again, okay, because we definitely, in bones, we know you have a lot of similarities, muscles not as much. So I will see you all in the next video.